There is an old courtyard in Kyiv on Saksahansky Street. Here there are 3 buildings labeled with the letter P. In one of them, writer and playwright Mykola Lysenko lived. In the second building, the Kosach family and the poetess Lesa Ukrainka lived. In the third building, Mykola Lysenko lived. He's considered the Ukrainian equivalent of the Hungarian composer Ferenc Liszt or the Polish composer Frédéric Chopin, the founders of national music of their countries. Both of them lived and worked in the 19th century in Paris, the center of advanced musical ideas. Perhaps for this reason they became old-class masters. Ukrainian composer Mykola Lysenko could also have made a career in the capital of the Russian Empire, St. Petersburg, or even in Leipzig, but he returned to Ukraine. The pianist, teacher, conductor, composer, and folklorist told the world about the beauty of a folk song, revealed the potential of original music, and became the source of national theater art in Ukraine. Thousands of people from all over Ukraine came to Kyiv to say the last words to the genius of Ukrainian music. The choir that marched in front of the funeral procession consisted of 1,200 people. "He's not dead, he's gone to stay," said someone in the crowd about Mykola Lysenko. The story of the great composer began in the Poltava oblast, among nature in parental caress and the sounds of folk melodies. Mykola Lysenko was a member of an old family of Cossack gentry from the Cherkasy Oblast. Parents who were fairly wealthy people indulged the child. People say he grew up very moody and self-willed. His father commanded a squadron in the Cuirassier regiment. The boy often visited military celebrations with his father. Perhaps it was at such events that the knack and good ear for music of the future composer appeared. "Stop! You soldiers can't play in this way with your pipes, tubas and drums. This is not suitable, so play it the right way." The mother of the future composer was an officer's orphan. From childhood, she grew up in St. Petersburg, where she graduated from the Smolny Institute. She did not know the Ukrainian language and often spoke with Mykola in French, because he didn't want to communicate in Russian. And as he became famous, in order to please the maestro, she started speaking Ukrainian, and Lysenko ineptly poked fun at her. "Mother, while you're trying your best, it is not necessary to hurt Ukraine in such a way." From an early age, Mykola studied reading and writing, foreign languages, dancing, and playing the piano. He used to sit with his mother and play music in 4 hands. In the middle of the 19th century, the most noble children led this way of life. But despite such painstaking experience, the common folk supported the boy. He behaved well and lived according to traditions. His grandmother, who was a landowner, was madly in love with Ukrainian folk songs, tales and sayings. He listened attentively to the stories of fellow villagers. The melodies of my people are charming. Grandma, why it is little known outside of Ukraine? A funny story happened with Mykola on vacation after the 5th grade of the gymnasium. Together with a cousin, the future writer and playwright Mikhailo Staritsky fell in love with the same attractive young girl, Fiokla, who lived on a nearby farm. She was a typically coquettish country girl. It did not matter to her whether it was Mikhailo or Mykola. The guys together made a plan how to win the heart of the girl. They decided that Mykola would write love songs and Mikhailo would write poems. Everything was planned to perform for the charming muse. Without their parents knowing, the two lads went in ceremonial high school uniforms, a red collar with gold embroidery. After the evening tea, the guys announced their joint work. The song ended with the words, "Give us at least a single kiss for our heartful madrigal." As a reward for the naive couplets, Fyokla gave both her hands to the 11 boys for a kiss. "Apparently we kissed them longer than we thought," as the girl said, "Enough, kiss more if you deserve it." She left the guests to spend the night on a farm. The guys did not sleep, they shared their impressions and plans for the next day. In the morning they were going to go to the Dnieper River for a picnic. However, at dawn they received a warning note from their parents. "Our parents said we should immediately return home." Being distraught, they went home without even saying goodbye. "I never experienced such high emotions in my life, and they were not repeated." Years of the gymnasium were left behind. Mykola Lysenko entered the Department of Natural Sciences of the Physics and Mathematics faculty of the Kharkiv University and a year later moved to Kyiv. He received the degree of Candidate of Natural Sciences and became the assistant of the World Conciliator. But he was not keen on working in the civil service. Having mastered the technique of playing on the piano, he decided to give private lessons. Music attracted the young pianist, so he sought to expand his music horizons in order to gain good knowledge of this art. He could only achieve his goal by going abroad. "My dearest mother and father, yesterday I wrote to you from Kyiv, and today I am writing 128 miles from this Ukrainian capital. I was deeply saddened first, but then I thought about this and understood that I am leaving not against my will. What is more, I'm fulfilling my cherished dream." March of Mendelssohn. The German composer hardly predicted the popularity of this work. For more than a century, the hearts of the young beloved joined to this melody. A year after the presentation of the Wedding March, written for Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream, in 1843, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy organized the first state conservatory in Leipzig, and Mykola Lysenko went there. He studied under the tutelage of Professor Reinecke and Wenzel. This is exactly what Lysenko recalled upon his accession to the conservatory. "I played the serenade and Allegro giocoso for them. Reinecke did not let me finish. He simply listened by the page from both parts and said, 'Well done.'" And the elderly Professor Richter, who had great experience in such works, asked whether I understood German enough to listen to the professor, and if I knew and understood the theory behind it. Hearing my response, he smiled and said that everything would work out great. Such was the positive tone of his words that I understood everything. The musician paid 80 thalers in a year for studying at the conservatory. In comparison, the Dutch shirt cost 2 thalers, a bottle of Burgundy 1 thaler, a 2-room apartment 9 thalers per month, and a rental of a piano 4 thalers per month. In Germany, Lysenko wrote his first known work, Zapovit, based on the words of the poet Taras Shevchenko. Recognition came to Lysenko after a concert in Prague. From the European stage, Ukrainian songs sounded in the composer's piano arrangements. The Czech newspaper Narodny Listy National Letters wrote, "We saw an interesting creative person, a pianist named Lysenko. His play, expressive and smooth, deserved general praise. The heroic rampage of the Zaporizhian melodies and courageously wild Cossack enthusiasm penetrated deep into the soul of the audience." Mykola Lysenko arrived home for holidays in the glory of the world. His heart belonged to music, but there was enough space for love in it. His beloved was the charming Olga O'Connor. The girl's parents were landowners of Irish descent who came to Russia during the Napoleonic Wars. They lived near the Lysenko estate. The musician married his dearly beloved. He returned to Leipzig with his wife, where she studied singing. It seemed that the pianist would have a bright future in Europe, but Ukraine was always in his heart. However, his native land greeted the composer very sadly. In 1876, the Russian government issued the Ems Decree. Tsar Alexander II decided to eliminate the Ukrainian language from the cultural sphere and limit its use only to everyday life. By this decree, printing of books, plays for the theater, and musical works in the Ukrainian language was strictly forbidden. The magical strings of the Ukrainian soul sounded quieter and quieter, but you cannot retreat. You have to work hard and at the very least clear the path for people to speak their native language and hear their music. Disregarding the royal ban, Lysenko compiled collections of folk songs and his own Music for the Kobzar by Taras Shevchenko. Lysenko realized that the Leipzig Conservatory wasn't enough for him. There was not enough money to thoroughly study orchestration abroad. It was cheaper to study in St. Petersburg. He arrived with considerable creative luggage. He's one of the creators of the theater of leading figures of the Ukrainian scene and the author of the opera Christmas Night, based on the work by Mykola Gogol, which became the foundation for the formation of the National Opera Theater. At the time, a lot of Ukrainians studied in the Russian Empire. Many of them personally knew the composer, so they organized a party for him, where they sang national songs. The next day, all the people came to the Neva embankment wearing national Ukrainian embroidered shirts and Cossack trousers near the Winter Palace, feeling almost like rebels. Then someone suggested to go to the Hermitage in this form. In addition, the newcomer Lysenko wanted to get acquainted with this miracle in the capital of Russia, but the doorman of this majestic shrine of silence did not let the whole company of the sons of Little Russia into the Temple of Art. It turned out that, according to the instructions, only gentlemen in uniforms and dress coats were allowed into the Hermitage. The Mihailovsky Palace on Art Square in the center of St. Petersburg, a monument of high classicism architecture. A conservatory was located within its walls. The light and airy building struck the composer by its nobility and the simplicity of lines. In the city, Lysenko wrote new works. In the house of Rimsky-Korsakov, Lysenko met with Russian composers and colleagues, Alexander Borodin and Modest Mussorgsky. Here's one interesting case. In St. Petersburg, the Ukrainian student choir of Lysenko from 20 to 25 people in the first half of 1875 alone performed 10 so-called Slavic concerts. After that, Rimsky-Korsakov became jealous and formed a choir of 120 singers. Lysenko could have stayed in Petersburg, seeing as he had a good career ahead of him. But he desperately wanted to return home. He set a task for himself in his native Ukraine. With all of his knowledge, back in his homeland for the first time he managed to record melodies, carols, arias, and duets, and new visions of Ukrainian music sparkled in his eyes. With my desire and love for work, I could achieve, if not brilliant then a good, lasting position in the performing field. I understood that. But I also knew that my native musical culture was a sphere that nobody had yet touched upon. So I decided to devote all of my talent and efforts to Ukraine. Khortytsa is an unusually picturesque island near Zaporizhia. On both sides, it is surrounded by the wide and mighty Dnipro River. The legendary island is located on one of the main trade routes of Ukraine. From ancient times, Slavs and Greeks traveled here. Here was the pagan temple. Prince Sviatoslav died on the island surrounded by the Pechenegs. The brightest pages in the history of Khortytsa are connected with the Cossacks. As part of the expedition of the archaeologist William Berenstam, the outpost of the Zaporizhian Cossacks was also studied by Mykola Lysenko. He walked around all the rocks, heard plenty of Cossack songs, and took part in excavations. What he saw and heard inspired him to write the cantata Beat the Thresholds. Later, the composer wrote an opera based on the work of Mykola Gogol, Taras Bulba. The libretto was prepared by a faithful friend, the playwright Mikhailo Staritsky. You cannot imagine how that long trip to Hortitsa helped me in my work. Would I have painted Sich, the Cossack assemblies, or the elections of the chieftain if I hadn't seen the remnants of that glorious past with my own eyes? The Russian composer Tchaikovsky asked his Ukrainian colleague to come to St. Petersburg and stage an opera in the Russian language. Unfortunately, while Lysenko was thinking about it, Tchaikovsky died. In 1880, the ban on performing songs and theatrical repertoire in the Ukrainian language, with some restrictions, was lifted. Lysenko collected the choir in Kyiv, rewrote new folk songs, wrote the words for romances, vocal ensembles, and operas, for example, The Drowned Woman. I did not allow myself to fall, and I would not allow anyone to lead me astray from the path that I was going along. Lysenko worked tirelessly. He collected samples of folk art, songs, ceremonies, and work with choral groups made it possible to perform them. As the poet Ivan Franko wrote, return to the people in a precious frame. But unfortunately, in the family not everything was so good. He lived with his wife Olha for 12 years. God did not give them children, and then they simply stopped living together. My first and most dedicated friend, sorry to leave you. And this is for the sake of a great dream to be called a father. Lysenko probably dedicated the words of the romance When Two Are Separated by Heinrich Heine to Olha O'Connor. The second wife, again, Olha, was from the Chernihiv family of Lipsky. She studied under the maestro on the piano to be accepted to the conservatory. She was very talented in music. She had an exceptional skill for drawing, and she took my idea of serving the motherland and helped me more than anyone. The young girl did not enter the conservatory. She gave birth to 7 children. 2 of them died. She died during the birth of the last son. Since the couple lived out of marriage, the children, according to the law of that time, were not considered legal. Our friend and first spouse, Olha O'Connor, provided all the necessary certificates and documents for adoption, so the children of Lysenko received the official right to have his last name. Ukrainian suite incited a real furor. The basis for this work were the elements of Ukrainian folk songs. After the work of a jeweler-composer, all musical intonations shone with a unique light. Mykola Lysenko, as a virtuoso pianist, did not just form the basis of professional musical performance. He, in fact, tried to bring listeners out of the rural life into the more urban European world. The power of conviction and patriotism, for which Lysenko sacrificed material success, fame, and even personal happiness, extolled his biography for universal interest and put him on the same line with the heroes of the human spirit. Mikhailo Staritsky, writer, playwright. Kyiv. At the intersection of Hreshatik Street and the Heavenly Hundred Alley, the International Center for Culture and Arts rises above. In the 19th century, girls from noble families were taught here etiquette and sciences. The institution was famous for music education. Some graduates gained fame as pianists and opera singers. Mykola Lysenko taught at the Institute of Noble Maidens. This was exactly the place where he met his last love. I thrash about, I cannot find my place, I bite my lips, and I try to think about something else, but it does not help. An expensive image stands before my eyes, and again I feel joy and the anguish of love. These lines are addressed to young Inna Andrianopolska, a 17-year-old student of the Institute of Noble Maidens. The girl captivated the heart of her teacher. Inna, my muse. All of us are people with higher spiritual tasks, exploring the world of beauty and truth. And at the same time, we're people with God-given passions. We don't oppose poetic inspirations and pleasures, but we combine them as creatures of spirit and flesh. The love story of the composer and his student was not long and flowed epistolarily. I'm a middle-aged man, but I don't want to say that I'm old. That goes as well as my soul, spirit, convictions, and activity. But I don't give up until at least one drop of blood passes through my heart. The girl's parents were against such relations. They sent the daughter to learn music in the province far away from Kyiv. In 1904, the Music and Drama School in Kyiv met the first students. The composer devoted the last years of his life to this institution. The learning institution provided higher musical and theatrical education. Mykola Lysenko sought to educate actors and musicians, especially for the national Ukrainian stage. Thanks to his efforts, the first in the entire Russian Empire class of playing on the folk instrument called the bandura was opened. We'll try to give them our knowledge, and they will convey a song and powerful words to people, which will awaken their thoughts and warm their hearts. Isn't it a good reason to give up everything and completely surrender yourself to good schooling? Lysenko, without a doubt, is considered the founder of the composers' school in Ukraine. He became the author of a national musical language. In the last years of his life, the composer headed the first legitimate Ukrainian social and political organization, the Kyiv Ukrainian Club. A fatal event was the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the death of Taras Shevchenko. The Tsarist regime was afraid of the outbreak of massive events and possible unrest, but to cancel the commemoration would have been suspicious. The rallies were moved from Kyiv to Moscow. At the same time, the police closed the Kyiv Ukrainian Club. Activists were charged with anti-government activities. This dealt a serious blow to the composer's health. In an autumn morning, Mykola Lysenko was going to the music and drama school. But a heart attack cut short the life of an outstanding Ukrainian. The maestro died on November 6, 1912. Mykola Lysenko was a founder and a prophet. He was the author of more than 10 operas, and he recorded 1,500 folk songs, from which he published 539 works. The composer wrote almost 90 romances to the words of Taras Shevchenko. The prayer for Ukraine can be considered the composer's life credo. Today, this work is the spiritual anthem of an independent sovereign state that we know as Ukraine.